They were the heroes from the future, teenagers protecting the universe from those that would sow the seeds of chaos. Each had unique powers and abilities, and though they often had their differences, they came together to save the day as the Legion of Superheroes. Now you can be a part of their adventures and learn the history of the future in the Legion Clubhouse.
Matthew, do you think Jim Shooter ever read any Agatha Christie?
Oh, almost certainly.
Well, we're going to find out how those two connect in this week's issue.
Adventure Comics number 348. Target 21 Legionnaires. Published September 1966. Written by Jim Shooter with art by George Papp from Shooter Layouts. Sunboy faces his greatest challenge, the man who made him.
We have two amazing adventure comics this week.
Yeah. At least noteworthy adventure comics.
The first issue is really interesting because it starts off with a quote about 8 little legionnaires flying near to heaven. One lost his memory, and then there were 7. And it goes all the way down until there were no legionnaires left. And if anyone has ever seen the movie and then there were none, it is a little murder mystery on an island by Agatha Christie. It's based on a book that in the United States is called 12 Little Indians.
Is it 12 or is it 10?
10 Little Indians, 12 Little Indians, I forget which one it is. But you don't want to go look up the real title of the book.
No, you do not.
That book was written like in 1939, I want to say.
And it is super offensive.
At that time, certain words were acceptable, apparently. Apparently, they were also acceptable to be putting on the covers of books. Yeah, it's 10 Little Indians. So in the United States, they named it 10 Little Indians, and then when it was re-released in 1940, they changed the name to And Then There Were None, although the little poem remains intact inside the book, where it runs down how we're going to eliminate all of the characters on the island. Or in this case, how we're going to target 21 Legionnaires, yet only 7 of them actually do anything in this book.
And it's interesting because the film version of 10 Little Indians came out in 1965.
Yeah, and then there was none.
Yeah, and this is a super topical issue, which is important, I think, which for reasons we'll get to in a moment. I have a theory about Adventure 348 and 349.
Okay. What are they? You want to get into that now, or do you want to
Let's go over the issue first, and then we'll talk about my theory about these two issues.
So, first of all, Sunboy gets a whole new look in this book, thanks to Swan. Actually, no, this is George Papp.
This is George
Papp doing the art in this issue.
But Sunboy starts to get his trademark curly hair. Eventually, in the 80s, he'll have a full-on Jerry curl. But he starts to get his trademark curly hair in these pages.
Yeah, it's really wild. And I'm not complaining when I say that these characters suddenly have a different look, because as we get into, the future, these characters will have different costumes, and especially when we get into the Archie Legion, these characters will have completely different looks. But it is kind of weird that even though we are, 60, almost 100 issues into Legion adventures and Legion appearances, to have them suddenly radically have a hairstyle change or a costume change, or in the case of Sunboy, as we'll find out in this issue, a whole origin story change is really, really weird.
Yeah. And the same thing does happen a bit to Duo Damsel, just in terms of her personality.
And that could be explained away because she's missing part of herself.
That's entirely possible. But this is the first issue that gives her what I think in the late 60s, early 70s is going to be her defining characteristic. And that is a crush on Superboy.
Which is really weird, too, because, eventually she does end up with Bouncing Boy. And it's really weird to see her have this crush and have it played out as this series progresses, especially when we get into one of the upcoming issues where that's not quite her crush does not quite work right.
And actually, when they have to reboot the Legion and remove Superboy after the Legion of Superheroes, Lorne, who still has that same crush, but it's on Valor / Mon-El, So it really is one of the cornerstones of Triplicate Girl / Duo Damsel, almost for the rest of the existence of these characters.
Yeah. What's interesting is this issue also sees it's time for Election Day. Instead of having issue after issue of New Legion tryouts, we're finally here for Election Day. And it's really interesting because we're not throwing planets at anybody's heads. We are probably doing something that's a little bit more democratic, although, hey, Phantom Girl, step up and press the button and let's see which, who lights up. Not really, a secret ballot.
No.
But we do have a kind of a democratic election where everybody, regardless of whether they are on planet or off planet, gets a choice and gets to vote. And it's really weird because I think if you count up all the X's in that box, there's probably more than 21, which is really weird. Also, Duo Damsel has 2 votes, and I wonder if she voted for herself twice.
That's just mean. Well, let's see. Invisible Kid has 8. Superboy has 7. That's 15. 2 for Colossal Boy is 17. Chameleon Boy 18. Light Lass 19. Shrinking Violet 20. Mon-El 21. Duo Damsel 22, 23. So there are 23 votes accounted for there. I wonder
if Jimmy is getting a vote.
Possibly, or Supergirl, or characters that we haven't seen. I don't know.
Yeah, it's really weird. I just was like, if there's supposed to be 21 Legionnaires.
There are 25 Legionnaires right now if we count everybody.
Then why is this called targeting 21 Legionnaires? And
because
we're
only
targeting
21 of them are active.
And
Starboy's with the subs.
Well, so, I mean, he can't vote, and neither should Bouncing Boy be able to vote.
So that means 23. So, well, no, yeah, no, wait, no, yeah. 23, because we got 4 new Legionnaires, who, by the way, not in these issues.
Yeah, so who are the Legionnaires that were missing from the previous issues?
Well, of course, Karate Kid.
Yep.
Nemesis Kid, who was actually drummed out of the Legion, so I guess it's only 3 new Legionnaires. Princess Projectra and Pharaoh Lad are not seen in issue 348 and 349. Which is part of my theory, which we'll get to later.
Oh, then I think I know what your theory is.
Yeah.
Because I kind of have the same feeling, too, especially when we're looking at some of the PAP art. And a lot of these future cities look more like 1950s cities.
And there's a lot about we might as well do it now, huh? There's a lot about, especially 348, that feels very much like the traditional Legion story we've seen.
Yeah.
Whereas especially that One of Us is a Traitor story, felt like a big new thunderbolt from the blue. I believe that 348 may be an issue that either the idea or part of it was in the works before Shooter arrived. And it was given to Shooter to take this existing idea and turn it into an issue of Legion of Superheroes.
That could be. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me, especially when we have a new writer on board who's young. I mean, this kid's still going to school, supposedly, or hopefully he's still going to school at this point. He's
still in high school.
14. I mean, he could be a dropout, get a GED or something like that. I don't know. I'd have to go and look. But if there's some time constraints, you're right. It wouldn't surprise me if we have the editor go and say, "Hey, here's an idea that was kicking around a couple of months ago, and we kind of passed on it. Can you do something with it?" Or maybe they already had the outline or a good rough draft sketched out, and they're telling Shooter, "Hey, why don't you hip it up? Why don't you make it something that these kids today can understand?" Because there's some really crazy, tragic endings in these two issues that are screaming right out of X-Men.
Oh, absolutely. And you still do, even with George Papp being a more traditional artist, I'd say more staid than Kurt Swan, you do still see the Jim Shooter layouts, his rough pencils or breakdowns of the issue. You can see in the layouts that this is something entirely different, especially in the action sequences, or that whole page spread where Colossal Boy does his growing thing, and it's like a 5-page grid. So you get panel, and then a big double panel of Colossal Boy growing.
Yeah.
That looks really dynamic and really cool. And by the way, that costume, what I call the Bucky Goldstein costume,
yeah,
is never has never been as pretty, nor will it ever again be as pretty as it is in these pages right here.
I'll agree with you. It has never been ever pretty. Correct. So in this story, we have this guy called Dr. Regulus, which, man, that is a fantastic villain name. Dr. Regulus.
And it's actually his civilian name. His name is Saxton Regulus. It's like, hi, here's our new war correspondent, Howitzer Explosion Guy. You cannot help but be evil if you are named Saxton Regulus.
He has a pretty plain costume. I love there's one panel in here where he's in full costume, yet he's drinking from a martini glass.
He kind of looks like
Iron Man, perhaps?
A little bit of Iron Man, or a firefighter in special gear.
Could be that too.
That was my first thought, was that it's something based on firefighting gear with like an air hose or an air supply.
This is 1966. When is Iron Man's debut?
63.
So there could very much be some Iron Man inspired stuff going on here, which wouldn't surprise me. Now, I was doing some little research on Dr. Regulus, and some people say, oh, he may have been inspired by Iron Man, but there was a Marvel villain, not Sagittarius. I forget what this guy's name is. But they think that he may have also been inspired by that character as well. I'd have to go back and look to see where it is. But anyway, this guy has a mad hate for Sunboy. And he figures that if he can knock him unconscious, that will bring on, the popular trope of the day, amnesia.
Any sort of injury to the head in the 1960s would cause you to lose your memories and your knowledge of who you are. It is a biological fact, and it has something to do with what was in the water in the 1960s. Because this happened on the Brady Bunch, this happened on Gilligan's Island, this happened on Hogan's Heroes. It's not just a bad storytelling trope, Stephen. It's not just a zeitgeist. It is, in fact, biological fact, and it stopped on December 31st, 1969.
There you go.
True facts.
There you go. So what ends up happening is Dr. Regulus in his giant carrot-shaped gold ship steals the Legion Clubhouse. Meanwhile, the Legionnaires are like, the Legion Clubhouse is a little bit more important than chasing after Sunboy, who's lost his memory, which is good because Sunboy, in his panic, decides to hide out in a nuclear power plant.
Yes.
And he decides to sleep right next to the radioactive core.
Right, which
it's like you do.
Dumb. Like you do, yeah. But this is the thing. We learned several issues, actually, like 20 issues ago in Adventure 302. Remember the issue of Sunboy's lost powers?
Yes, he says, my dad put me in a box and shot me with radiation rays.
No, he actually says, I got my powers by being exposed to an atomic reactor, and now I'm going to try and get my lost powers back by exposing myself to another atomic reactor, which means two things. Either in the future, atomic radiation is no longer as poisonous as it might be to a human of, say, 1967, or Sunboy's sun powers mean a whole lot more than making heat. He may actually be immune to radiation and nuclear type power, atomic radiation.
Yeah, my guess is he's just absorbing it.
Right.
Much like Superman absorbs the light of the sun to energize himself and to power up his cells. Sunboy is doing that all the time, whether he probably knows it or not, whether he's being exposed to nuclear energy or whether he is actually a solar battery and charging himself up. That would be my guess. But we have at this point two different origin stories of Sunboy, correct?
Yes and no. This is less retcon, I think, than it is
well, I'm talking about before this issue.
The first time we see Sunboy's origin, or we have any reference to Sunboy's origin, is that 302, which is his third appearance.
Okay.
And it just says, I got my powers from exposure to an atomic reactor.
Okay.
But they never really showed us what happened. So this is more of a adding in sort of retcon than a whole cloth or rewrite retcon.
Yeah, because as we find out at the end of this issue, Sunboy, the reason why Dr. Regulus wants him out of the way is because Sunboy knows him right away because of his name. I mean, could go by Gold Suit Man. I mean, that would probably be a better way to confuse a teenager.
He could go by Gold Man, but then they think he runs the pharmacy, and that just never works.
So what ends up happening is Sunboy's like, no, I got my powers because I accidentally stumbled into Dr. Regulus's lab, and there was an explosion, and that's how I got my powers.
Mm-hmm. And this again feels a little bit like sort of some Marvel-style storytelling added to the existing bit. We know that Sunboy got powers from an atomic reactor,
Mm-hmm.
but this actually adds in that wrinkle of an evil scientist working for his dad, trying to kill Dirk in order to get revenge on his dad or what have you, and ended up giving him his powers. It kind of gives Dirk a little bit of, tragedy in his backstory rather than just science fiction origin of, yep, atomic radiation, baby, let's move on.
Yeah. So going back to your hypothesis that this may have been a setup story or something that was already there and Shooter just went in and polished it up and got the credit for it, goes back to the 10 Little Indians gimmick that starts off this story.
Yeah.
And the fact that one by one, Dr. Regulus tries to take out each member of the Legion of Superheroes in his giant, which apparently has to be super huge ship. It's at least a quarter mile long, is at one point it's described.
It looks like a carrot.
It really does. But one by one, giant robot takes down Colossal Boy. We have a gas that tries to take out Duo Damsel and Phantom Girl. And Cosmic Boy gets, well, he's already kind of taken out. But a Cosmic Boy robot tries to take out Brainiac 5. It's really crazy, man. One by one, he does that.
Cosmic Bot. Yeah, and
Cosmic Bot. There you go.
Cosmic Bot. I think that the use of that literary technique feels very much like hey, somebody in editorial, Mort Weisinger's office, had a cute idea.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how this story came around. The idea for a cover or a gimmick started the story, and they said, hey, let's tell that Shooter kid and see what he can make of this.
Yeah, because I think, I don't know, this feels like it's not following that gimmick very well, as far as the, and then there were none.
Yeah. That's another reason why I kind of have this sinking feeling, or this thing in the back of my head that says, we had a traditional pitch.
Mm-hmm.
We had an editorial idea, and they gave it to the kid, and the kid's like, well, this doesn't seem like fun.
Right.
Or this doesn't seem, hip, cool Spider-Man stuff. This doesn't feel like the kind of story I'm going to tell. And so it's there, but it's not the crux of the story. The crux of the story ends up being the drama between, Iron Man and the Human Torch. I mean,
it really is kind of that way, right? I mean, it really kind of devolves into this tragic, here's this evil scientist who has always worked for my father who created me. And he's been after me ever since because he blames me for getting fired.
Yeah. It's sort of a tragedy in as much as Regulus feels that this kid or this kid's family is responsible for all the ills of his life, which doesn't necessarily feel like a Silver Age Mort Weisinger plot so much.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It gives a little too much pathos. It gives a little too much emotion, I think, to Regulus to just say, well, yeah, he's a bad guy and he caused Sunboy. So
there's still some weird wording and some awkward moments in this issue because as they're on the ship and they're all splitting up into teams again, always split your party, ladies and gentlemen. Remember that. That's the best way to take out the villain is to split your party.
Split your party, especially when one of them is Invisible Kid,
yes,
whose only power is not being seen.
Yes. But at one point, Invisible Kid says, okay, everybody split up. You two girls go together.
Yeah.
And I can see that from the standpoint of, hey, in order for this Cosmic Boy robot thing gimmick to work or the gas to work later on in the issue, the girls need to be together because that's how I want to take them both out. But man, it's just, hey, everybody split up except for you two girls. You're not good enough to split up with anybody else. You two stick together.
It very much feels regressive. Not necessarily out and out sexist, but it's definitely close enough to sexism to where you're kind of like, oof.
I mean, it stands out. That's all I'm saying is it kind of stands out.
It does. It sticks out.
The other thing that's kind of interesting in this issue is that all of the heroes get to use their powers in this book, including Invisible Kid, except for Duo Damsel. We never see her split in this issue. Yet Phantom Girl goes intangible at one point. Invisible Kid gets to do his invisible thing. Cosmic Boy gets to use his magnetics. Colossal Boy gets to grow.
Philosophizing, yeah.
Yeah, everybody gets to do something except for Duo Damsel. And I just found that really, really odd. I mean, it really stood out. Although one could argue that Brainiac 5 really wasn't using his 12th level intellect.
Right, but he did use his force shield belt, which is kind of, in practice, his real superpower.
Is his force field belt? Okay.
Yeah, in a lot of ways. I mean, because you can't visually say, my brain sure is awesome. But you can visually say, I've created this technological marvel that makes me impervious to harm.
Yeah, so I just found it odd that Duo Damsel didn't get her powers seen in here. Unless it's the secret voting. Secret voting. That's what I'm doing is, of course we didn't see her powers because she voted twice. I wonder if anybody's ever done that. Of course, obviously, voting illegally, impersonating someone else or something is totally illegal in the real world. But I just wonder, if there's ever been an identical twin who his brother is just like, man, I'm too sick to go to the polls today. Can you go down and take my ID and vote for me?
Does this, though, also raise the question about Kargites? I mean, is a Kargite one being, or should she be treated as three beings who can be in one form? I mean, you could make the argument easily that Lornu should get 2 votes because she's actually 2 beings, even though she spends most of her time in a united form.
Yeah, now I may be thinking of something totally wrong because this may be super future Legion storytelling. But at one point, when Triplicate Girl was Triplicate Girl, when she splits into her component parts, don't they get like 1, 2, and 3 designations?
Separate personalities, yeah.
I know they have separate personalities, but I didn't know if they referred to each other as like Triplicate Girl 1 or Triplicate Girl 2, and that's how they always refer to themselves. Because I know in the future, in the Archie Legion, when they split, they each have a different color costume.
I don't recall them ever numbering, but the whole concept of one who's outgoing, one who's shy, and one who's right in the middle actually comes around before the Legion reboots in 1994.
Okay.
It's something that comes out of the Volume 3 Legion. It becomes a really big deal for her later on.
What are your thoughts on the retcons? Because I would say, is Mon-El the one that gets the most retcons? Or Valor, or however you want to call him. Is he the one that gets the most retcons?
I think as part and parcel, he does, as part and parcel of being a Superboy kind of type character. Because when you say Mon-El exists and he thought he was Superboy's big brother, well, Superboy didn't exist. Okay, so he didn't thought he was Superboy's big brother.
Right.
But then, okay, this also, and then this, and okay, we'll add this in. The Legionnaires go through a lot of changes. I mean, even the simplest of Legionnaires with the simplest of histories, which is probably Invisible Kid, there is some retconning that goes on because the idea of what an idealized future situation should be changes from 1958 to 2018. Holy crap, is it the 60th anniversary of the Legion?
Probably getting close.
Wow. But yeah, I would say that Mon-El probably gets it, if not the worst, presuming you don't consider Superboy and Supergirl as having it worse just because of getting erased.
Yeah, I would eliminate those two. But Princess Projectra, she gets her origin story changed around quite a bit.
I think I would say Karate Kid might have it worse simply because Karate Kid keeps getting killed and resurrected.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
Part of that is Keith Giffen saying every time I'm on Legion, I'm going to kill Karate Kid.
Yeah. Okay, well, but you're okay with these changes that we're getting? I mean, they're kind of subtle and they're kind of expanding on it. It's like, well, yeah, I know I said I was locked in a radioactive chamber, but here's really what happened.
Right. It turns out someone locked me there. That doesn't feel like so much a change as it does an expansion. Like throughout the first 2 seasons of Star Trek: The Next Generation, we heard about this Khitomer situation where the Federation and the Klingon Empire finally ceased their hostilities. What is Khitomer? We don't know what Khitomer is. And we finally find out, a couple of years later in Star Trek VI, exactly what all that is about and how it ties back to Lieutenant Worf and how, Michael Dorn has to be in there because it's a Star Trek thing. If you don't have a casting gag, what's the fun of it? I feel like that type of expanding on a story or saying, and also Doctor Strange was there or something along those lines, it feels a little more, not necessarily defensible, but understandable to say, okay, remember how we told you Sunboy got his powers from a nuclear reactor? Well, this is why he was in a nuclear reactor, rather than saying, okay, you remember how we told you that Sunboy was bitten by a radioactive sun? It turns out that's stupid. So he was actually locked in by an evil guy named Dr. Goldman.
Well, that is an interesting kind of retcon of Sunboy. But I think in the next issue, things get even more super duper emo.
If you enjoy the show, we would appreciate your support. You can find out more and become a Legion Clubhouse member at patreon.com/major spoilers. Adventure Comics number 349, The Rogue Legionnaire, published October 1966. Written by Jim Shooter, with art by Kurt Swan from Shooter Layouts. A new friend arrives to help fight off the menace of Universo. But what is his connection to the villain?
In issue 349, we get a story that just seems rather kind of like thrown away. Just when I read this originally, I sit there and I go, oh, this is really not that interesting of a story. But what comes out of issue 349 in the future is amazeballs.
Absolutely. And this is interesting because 348 and 349 do something that I think is notable. They both introduce two, well, each of them introduces one iconic Legion villain. Because the villain that we see, Dr. Regulus, does come back at least a time or three. And becomes
31
kind
appearances is what Dr. Regulus has.
Yeah, he's kind of Sunboy's Dark Mirror character. So you know you've really made it when you have a Venom or, you know, whatever it is the Batman's Dark Mirror would be. I say the Wrath.
Yeah.
Some say the Joker.
But this issue, we get introduced to the Rogue Legionnaire, an old guy known as Universo the Unwanted.
Universo. An old bald guy, because Kurt Swan draws bald guys really well.
And he's got an eye patch kind of thing going on.
He's got like a monocle and pointed ears and a goatee. He's got all of the 60s marks of evil characters.
He wears a costume that's kind of like Mon-El's, but the cape is different.
Mm-hmm. And he's got the evil eye of Ekron or whatever it is around his neck.
Well, that is an interesting question because he does wear this thing around his neck that is shaped like an eye. It is green. It's not the emerald eye of Ekron because that is something completely different.
Yeah, that comes up later.
There is a page where he's not pulling a Dr. Vertigo, but he certainly does look like he's pulling a Dr. Stephen Strange with that eye of Agamemnon.
Agamotto.
Yes.
This is the eye of Agatha Christie.
But
the Indians.
But Universo wants to join the Legion because he has the power of super hypnosis.
So he can help you lose weight or quit smoking.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he can do all sorts of things with his hypno powers.
And what he wants to do most of all is destroy the Legion of Superheroes by stealing their time bubble and going off into one of 5 possible pasts.
And can I just say how interesting it is that the pasts are actually the pasts of what was then the present as well as the future? Because we're 1,000 years on from 1967, but all 5 of the eras to which Universo travels are in the past of 1967.
Right. Yeah. Nobody goes to like 1975.
Right. They didn't observe the Star Trek rule of 2 real and 1 fake.
Right. Right.
Where you go to Peru in 1300 and England in 693, and then planet Omicron 12, home of the exploding squirrels, in the year 2166.
Yeah, which would be the interesting way to go. But instead, maybe they're trying to get a little bit of a history lesson in here, which, again, doesn't feel very Jim Shootery to me.
History lessons actually are kind of a shootery thing. Shooter likes to put in real-world references and things like, hey, did you know? And also, keep in mind, he's actually in ninth grade history classes
That's
at
true.
the time that he's writing this.
That is true. Which is interesting because while Jim Shooter is in high school, the Legion members actually go to the Metropolis Students Science Fair to judge some of the science projects. And you can get a digital computer is one of the cool things of the future. There's also a moving scale model of an asteroid belt. And we get to meet one little kid who invents the time cube, something that can transport matter back and forth through time, providing that that item is in the exact same place when it's coming back.
So the very first appearance of the Legion of Superheroes features the time bubble.
Right.
Which allows you to travel back in time.
I can't remember, is it the time bubble or the time sphere? Because they keep changing that.
I think
in the
they
early
go
days.
back and forth. Sphere, bubble.
Yeah. Yep.
But what has happened here is Rond Vidar, unnamed child, has created something that already exists, but he did it in high school. So everybody is lauding him for this.
Well, and I know that it seems kind of weird because I'm like, well, that's kind of dumb to reinvent something that's already been out there. But how many times do we see the volcano? I mean, I've got a young kid who did a science fair at his summer program this year. And his project was, we're going to build a volcano and we're going to blow it up. And then we're going to study where the lava flows to see if we can help predict or understand where lava might flow and how it might flow and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, okay, how many times have we seen a vinegar and baking soda volcano?
True.
And so maybe because he is using something that is...
He built it with a 30th century version of an erector set.
Yes, essentially. Maybe that's what makes it interesting. Also, the other thing that is interesting is when Universo escapes in the time bubble, the Professor Huxton of the Chrono Research Lab contacts the Legion of Superheroes and saying, hey, we just picked up some time travel activity and we weren't aware of any scheduled trips. Did you guys do something? So it seems like in the future, not anyone can just go time traveling. It seems to be scientists belonging to the Chrono Research, and it seems to be very controlled.
Yeah, the Chrono Research Lab actually evolves into what becomes the Time Institute.
That's what I was wondering.
And I'm not saying that one of the characters in this issue becomes a key part of the Time Institute. I'm just saying that one of the characters in this issue is about to become a key part of the Time Institute.
Could it be our young child?
Could it be the 14-year-old who created time travel with an erector set and a Lionel Twain?
So the Legion members get sent back to all these different times. We get sent back to Cusco. We get sent to ancient Egypt. We get sent to
ancient Greece, where weren't
and England.
No,
and the time of the Napoleonic Wars. And in each time period, as the Legionnaires are trying to investigate what's going on, someone there has been hypnotized by Universo to be on the lookout for these people. And the minute you see them, you need to kill them.
I think the best one is when Chameleon Boy arrives at an Incan settlement in the year 1300. He uses his powers to reflect the sun and is automatically declared to be a sun god. So he turns himself into a sun god. And I'm thinking, this is such a Jim Kirk thing to do here. This is a problem. I feel that Chameleon Boy may be changing history by messing with the Incans in the year 1300 and getting thrown in a volcano to see if he survives.
Maybe, but he's around for like 10 minutes as he gets thrown in the volcano, and the real Incan sun god is like, no, I am your sun god. I am your chief, and I will throw him down into the volcano with me, and we'll both die. The thing that I find most interesting in this is the story structure, in that we get a little bit of like, here's Chameleon Boy in the land of the Incas, and then we're going to, before anything happens, we're going to flash over to Shrinking Violet and her first attempts to engage with Egyptian civilization. And then before anything can happen to her, we'll jump back to Chameleon Boy, and then we'll check and see what's going on with Colossal Boy, and then Saturn Girl. And so we each get a little bit back and forth with each one of these until each of the Legion members are about to die. And then we cut back to the future.
And it's interesting because we see Colossal Boy in 7th century Britain being attacked by someone who may or may not be King Arthur. And of course, his powers are on the fritz. So you wonder now if all of the British history and talking about Fomorian giants and stuff is based on Colossal Boy showing up in the year 693 by accident. And of course, the real moment, the penultimate moment of this story, Saturn Girl ends up in 1812, where Liberace wants to know what she's doing in his wine cellar.
It's not Liberace, it's Napoleon.
He looks like Liberace. Page 16, panel 5. That he might as well be saying, "I wish my brother George were here."
So in the future, Universo thinks that he has killed all the Legion members. Again, he's taken out 5. There are 21, as we've already established. But he's
taken out all the Legion members in this issue, and that's what matters.
He strides triumphantly into the United Planets Council building, and he thinks that he will hypnotize the council into declaring him the leader of all things. And it turns out that they all pull off their Mission Impossible masks to reveal that, no, we've been here all along. He's like, wah! Gordon's alive.
Lifelike rubber masks, trademark.
I know lifelike rubber masks are something that pop up quite a bit. And he doesn't believe it. He's like, how did you do that? And it's all thanks to this young boy. And the guy's like, no, not him at all.
It can't be him.
And as they lead him off in a straitjacket, nonetheless, they
ask the boy, how did you know? How did Universo know about your exhibit? Why was he so upset? And he says, because Universo is my father.
Bum, bum, bum. What a tragic end for this young lad who we really I don't think they name him in this issue, do they? He's just called Boy and this young lad, but he is revealed to be Ron Vidar.
Ron Vidar, who he will loom large in the history of several Legionnaires, one of whom is in this issue.
Right. So there are a couple of things that Ron Vidar is going to be a recurring character in the Legion story. So we're going to talk about him in about 6 more episodes with issue, what is it, 360, I believe.
360 is actually, I think, where he gets his name, yes.
Yeah. And we'll talk more about, Ron Vidar and his thing. But there's something that I want to talk about that is really crazy. And that is Ron Vidar is eventually revealed to be a member of the Green Lantern Corps.
That is correct. Not only that, Ron Vidar is revealed to have inherited his ring from his dad, which means that Universo was likewise a member of the Green Lantern Corps.
What?
In fact,
this is totally crazy, because how does Universo, who is a villain and who lives in a world of superpowered beings, how does he become a Green Lantern?
Well, there are actually, I believe the story involving that is told sometime in the 1980s, but the short version goes like this. Have you ever wondered why there's no Green Lanterns in any of the Legion of Superhero stories?
I have not really ever thought about it, because everybody has a magical ring that lets them do incredible things.
Right, but there's also...
Let's say that in the future we might stumble upon an old Batman cave, but we will never discover an army of bat people who worship Batman,
right.
Or we may eventually meet a couple of speedsters who have lived in the future because their parents immigrated there. But yeah, I've never really ever thought about why there were no Green Lanterns in the future.
Well, the reason why there are no Green Lanterns on Earth in the future is that Vidar, Universo, was a member of the Green Lantern Corps, and he turned on his masters at the thought of getting power. And I believe it had something to do. Do you remember the story of Krona, the renegade guardian?
Oh, yeah, who went back in time, and you're not supposed to look at the big hand because...
Right, the big hand, because, you'll find out the center of the universe is actually a man named Sisineg, which is Genesis spelled backwards. No, wait, that's a different thing. But yes, Krona went back in time, found amazing power. Apparently, supposedly, Vidar, as a rank-and-file member of the Green Lantern Corps, theoretically Sector 2814, which would have once been Hal Jordan's beat. So there is a precedent for a Green Lantern turning evil and being stupid. But Vidar found out about that, wanted power, turned renegade,
Like
and
Sinestro.
right, and basically tried to take over the Earth. And the Guardians of the Universe and the United Planets made a solemn vow, basically a treaty, for lack of a better word, that says that the Green Lanterns are going to stay away from Earth.
Okay, but they're going to stay away from Earth, but Earth is not the only planet
In
in
Sector
that sector.
28.
Right.
So there is still a Green Lantern of that sector. And secretly, that Green Lantern was Rond Vidar, who inherits his father's ring and secretly acts as the Green Lantern without ever actually showing off his powers or openly using his abilities and identifying himself as such for many, many years, because Universo sticks around and becomes evil. And of course, the United Planets is like, nope, no Green Lanterns on Earth, go away.
So that brings up the question then, and this is something that isn't revealed again for decades in comics. Is Rond, he's not a Green Lantern at this point in this story, because Universo is still alive.
Well, Universo doesn't die to give Rond his powers. Universo is at this point
stripped of his
already
powers.
stripped of his Green Lantern powers.
Mm.
It is never made entirely clear when Rond gets his ring, because again, it is a story that's told like in 1987, and it's like, oh yeah, you totally have a Green Lantern ring, and he pops up and he's like, holy moly. But he was secretly recruited as a Green Lantern at some point in his life. He might be a Green Lantern in these pages.
He might be, and that's why if you look closely, Universo, when he's using his super hypnosis necklace, it's green.
Well, it's green because it contains kryptonite, so that he can use it to hypnotize
right.
Superboy.
I say he's also using it's partly Green Lantern powers too, because if you look, his costume not only looks like Mon-El's, it also looks like a certain Scott who was a Green Lantern. The only thing that's missing is a mask.
I will grant that the ugly red suit with the big goofy cape does in fact resemble Green Lantern.
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird that time and time again we see in these pages that the writer has to take out the hard, heavy hitters. We have to take out Superboy. We have to get one of the other characters off panel, off in space.
Ultra Boy's not around this episode, guys. He's not.
And neither's Mon-El. But we do have kryptonite-induced hypnosis on Superboy, who basically shuts him down. Yeah, just shuts him down.
Like that episode of Gilligan's Island where the professor gets hypnotized for the whole episode. Taking the professor out so that only the idiots are around. Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
I think I want to go with your theory, and I would agree that both of these issues feel like they were partially written or had a rough outline done, and then they said, here you go, Jim Shooter, do something with this.
Agreed. I feel like these feel like springboard plots or story ideas that were handed to Shooter, because the basis of the stories are pretty much of a piece with what we've seen with the Legion, what we see with a lot of the Silver Age Superman books. And at this point in time, the Legion is still pretty much considered a Superman title. I mean, Superboy is key to most of these issues. But there are still some Shooter twists and turns. I mean, I feel like Chameleon Boy turning himself into a god to prove himself something feels very shootery.
Oh, I was going to say the whole emo reveals of both of these is that, this guy created me and now he's my super nemesis, or this guy is my father. Both feel, like I said earlier in the show, feel very like X-Men reveals when you find out who is, Scott Summers' father, or when you find out how Magneto and Professor Xavier are connected with one another. It just becomes this, oh my gosh, this is and should be in these pages. Both of these should be super big reveals to have people talk about for months to come. But for some reason, they just, maybe because they've been so used since this date, both of these issues were just kind of like, yeah, so he's your dad. Right. Get over it. Everybody has a horrible father.
And I feel like, with the exception of Time Trapper, we haven't seen a lot of really scary, hyper-competent villains. And that's something that feels very shootery too, is making sure that the villains are threatening, making sure that the villains have sort of an internal life of their own, making the villains feel more real, because 2 issues in a row, actually 3 issues in a row if you count Nemesis Kid, you get characters who have strong motivations, have characters that you kind of understand, and that stick around for long periods of time in Legion history and keep recurring and popping up because of the strength of these first appearances, or because of the strength of the character sketches that we get of Universo, that we get of Dr. Regulus, that we get a Nemesis Kid, that all say, these are strong villains who you believe that these guys can face down 10 or 12 or 14 Legionnaires at a time.
I really want to see what Shooter does with the Time Trapper, because the last time we saw the Time Trapper, and you're talking about competent villains,
he was not
butt
competent.
kicked by a baby child.
He did, and you'll recall that before that he was built up and built up and built up, and I feel like part of the reason that people love the Time Trapper is because of that ominous buildup, and then not having him show up and all of a sudden be Jerry Lewis. Hello, lady, with the thing.
I mean, isn't that that's almost perfect, right?
It kind of is. Well, and he's been everybody else. I mean, he was a controller. He was Cosmic Boy. He might have been Saturn Girl.
Might have been a Durlin.
Jerry Lewis had a 200-issue series for DC Comics, so he is, in fact, a DC character.
That's true.
So I would say that having the Time Trapper with the Glaven is lovely with the Thing and the retcons.
Matthew, we have reached the end of another Legion Clubhouse, and what have we learned this week?
We learned that Shooter's Legion Clubhouse is a lot bigger than the one we saw back in the Hamilton Ford era.
I think we also learned that if you ever get amnesia, the cure is to sleep next to a nuclear reactor.
And we learned that when you join a team with a big fanfare, the right thing to do is immediately disappear for at least 4 issues.
That wraps it up for this installment of the Legion Clubhouse. Thank you so much for everything that you do, listeners. Share some reviews over on iTunes and Apple Podcasts. Head over to majorspoilers.com and share some thoughts in the comments section. And if you want to see this show continue, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/majorspoilers. Thank you so much for joining us this week. And until next time, I'm Time Travel Kid.
And I'm Here's Looking at You, Kid.
The Legion Clubhouse is a production of Major Spoilers Entertainment, LLC, and is produced by Steven Schleicher. Your hosts were Matthew Peterson and Steven Schleicher. You can follow Matthew at Mighty King Cobra and Steven at Major Spoilers. You can follow this podcast on Twitter at Legion Clubhouse. If you have questions or comments, send them to podcast@majorspoilers.com. I'm Jason Inman. Until next time, eat it, Grandpa.
This podcast is copyright 2018 by Major Spoilers Entertainment, LLC.